All right, we're back. We are back with Mr. James and myself here on the Bookcast. We are talking about Graham Greene, The Power and the Glory, his most notable work, or his most famous work, at least, by most accounts, apparently his masterpiece. It is the first and, as of yet, only book of his I have read. So before we get into it, and before we start discussing it, and before we give any sort of background on it, just want to share any quick thoughts, brief thoughts on it.
Well, I definitely enjoyed it myself. I myself have also not read anything else by Graham Greene, so this was uh, a new author for me to experience. Um,
Yeah.
and I can't get in. I don't want to get into all of it right away, but I will just start by saying I did enjoy it.
Same. Definitely same. Knocked my socks off, I would say. So before I'll give a short summary, very short summary, and some background on the book because, um, as many are probably familiar with, this book is a title I'm sure that they've heard before, but they haven't the foggiest idea what it's about because that was how I came into this book. I didn't even know it took place in Mexico until the book arrived and I read the blurb on the back, which shows how attentive I am. But yeah, so real quick on Graham Greene, in he's this book and he as well are famous in Catholic circles for being this book being a particularly profound meditation on the Catholic faith in some fashion. And Graham Greene himself was a well-known Catholic convert to the faith. In 1926, he converted the year before he married his wife, who was a Catholic, and he was obviously influenced into joining the church, in no small part due to her. He converted from Anglicanism, as it turns out, but he was not what I think most of us would consider to be the best Catholic in the world. Not that anybody ever is, I guess, but later in life he described himself as a Catholic atheist and or a Catholic agnostic at the weakest, and doesn't bode well for him. But he's a quite a fine writer, so he's also apparently suffered from some sort of mental affliction for most of his life. I'm not sure if it was like manic depression, bipolarism, or something more severe depression. I know he suffered with quite heavily, which probably painted his view of the faith, if I had to guess. But this book started off after a stint in Mexico. He traveled to Mexico for about 4 or 5 months in 1938, and he was there to research the persecution against the church under Tomas Garrido Canabal, who I'm hopefully pronouncing that right. Don't really care, but you can look all this up for yourself if you like. And the persecution was very widespread. It was the result of it was widespread within that particular state of Tabasco, which this book takes place in, because of the end of the Cristero uprising that took place at the end of the 1920s, which was in response to the state of Mexico trying to, not at the time quite purge the church out of Mexico, but to try to minimize or limit or actually eradicate its political influence in the country. This uprising, I honestly don't know whether you could call it successful or unsuccessful. I don't really know that much about Mexican history. But what it did result in is, after it was done away with, taken care of, certain states ended up with very serious persecutions against the churchmen. And this book this book is a novel about that. His time in Mexico resulted in The Lawless Roads, which is the nonfiction account of his time in Mexico when he was researching all of this, and then it resulted in this, which is, as I mentioned before, by some accounts, his masterpiece. So we're dropped into this right here. The book tells the story of an unnamed priest roaming the backwater Mexican forests in Tabasco during the 1930s, after the Cristera uprisings, had culminated in various Mexican states implementing draconian measures against the church, executing priests who did not renounce their station and take wives. This priest specifically is hunted by a curiously vigilant lieutenant who truly believes the Marxist lines of thought regarding organized religion and the church more specifically, and he's dedicated himself to eradicating the church's physical presence, the priests themselves, from the state. As the priest flees, he is tormented by the elements, by his pursuers, by the very people he is convinced he must still serve, and most of all by his conscience, by his sins, by his weakness, and moreover his awareness of that weakness. That is the book. So I can't really talk any more about it without just getting into it. So I'll let you get into. I've got some other things I'd like to touch on, but we can start with this. One more brief note, actually. In case of classic books like this that have well-known and respected movie versions made of them, I try to make an effort to see them after I read the book. Last time, when we talked about Silence, I was able to watch Masahiro Shinada's adaptation of Silence that was done in 1974 or so, which is really good. I still recommend it. Different from the book, but still good. Turns out this book was adapted as the movie The Fugitive, not the Harrison Ford one, but the one from 1947 starring Henry Fonda and directed by John Ford, which sounds great. So I'd hope one day I get to see that, but I didn't get to see it this time. So anyway, I'll let you go ahead and get a word in. Tell me your thoughts.
What a vivacious summary to start with, and I appreciate that as always. If I could start with a very general comment about the tone that the novel kicks off with. So the opening chapter of this novel is not focused on the priest himself, but actually on a secondary character.
The dentist.
A dentist who, I believe he's from Britain, if I'm remembering correctly, but he resides and works in Mexico at this time. And I just remember getting a very strong impression of the utter listlessness of the area.
Yes.
And I really think that tone essentially persists throughout the entire novel. Just the overwhelming sense that virtually no one who is here wants to be here. It's just pretty much miserable for almost everyone for various reasons.
Absolutely, yeah. That's one thing the book does really well. This being my first foray into Greene's written output at all, his style is very thick. I'm sure his other books are like this too, just based on his ability to wordsmith paragraphs together. But it really feels like overbearingly oppressive. You can feel the humidity, and the humidity is like crushing you to death in this entire story. Especially when you get to after the dentist sequence, when you get into the whole part with the priest, which is the whole book. It just feels miserable. Mexico just seems like a miserable place to live after you read this book.
Yeah, that's the overwhelming impression, yes. And just based on what little bits I just read on Wikipedia a few minutes ago about that nonfiction account you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. The Lawless Roads.
Yes. Wikipedia says that he made some remark about how he really began to hate Mexico while he was there.
Yes.
So that might have come through just a little bit in the novel.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Well, I can't hold myself back any longer from my analysis. So
yeah, just go right into
it. I will just start by saying it seems to me that the core of this novel is the character contrast between the priest who is on the run and the Mexican lieutenant who is hunting him down.
Okay.
And I feel like this character contrast is, as I said, I think it's at the heart of a lot of what the novel has to say. And as part of that character contrast, a question, and I think that question is, uh, how do you, the reader, assess which is better, a quote unquote good man without God or a quote unquote bad man with God?
Mm-hmm.
And just to explain a little bit more what I mean by that, um, the priest is characterized as, I never got this sense myself, but apparently it became a well known term, a whiskey priest, which
Mm-hmm.
is meant to communicate that the priest is in many ways not what many would consider an upstanding moral figure. Most primarily, he's an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much getting himself drunk all the time because apparently he finds it pretty hard to get by otherwise, just mentally and spiritually
Right.
in his present circumstances. Um, and then you add on other things like the fact that he had a child. I was going to say had a child out of wedlock, but
But
I mean,
he's a priest.
really, it's just the fact, as far as the Roman Catholic Church is concerned, that he had a child at all.
Yeah.
Um, and you can add on things like what he characterizes as his own cowardice, and you just have someone who doesn't seem, at least on the surface, doesn't seem all that admirable.
Mm-hmm.
This is your man of God. And then, in contrast, you have the lieutenant who is on fire for the gospel of materialistic atheism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he very fervently wants to exterminate the church and its emissaries. And he wants to do this because he, at least as far as the novel presents him, genuinely believes that this is a very large part of what it will take to make life better for everyone, but certainly the poor in particular, the downtrodden.
Yeah.
He very earnestly, it's not opportunity. I want to emphasize that he's not opportunistic at all. He genuinely believes
He's a
that
true believer. Yeah.
The Roman Catholic Church has been a source of great oppression and misery against the poor, and he is, in his eyes, fighting against that by stamping out the church. So here, at a superficial level, uh, is our character contrast, but you know whether who ends up looking better. Uh, well, it depends on a lot of priors, and
Absolutely.
I think we can
That's
talk more about that.
yeah.
What do you have to say after I unloaded all that?
I do agree. I agree on pretty much everything you mentioned. One thing I would say is I think the book tries to set itself up to be first and foremost a sort of character contrast, but I'm not really sure that it ends up succeeding in making it that the meat of the book, because it's an important core element of the book, no doubt, because I mean the climax of the book is these two finally coming face, well, actually they come face to face with each other before, but these two coming face to face with each other knowingly, and the priest getting, spoilers, getting caught and executed at the end. That is one thing I have to admit while reading it. I you sort of know he's going to die at the end of it, but you just kind of hope that he doesn't. There's this just enough inkling of maybe he'll make it out of this with his head, but of course he doesn't. But what I was going to say here was that the book spends so much time, like the lieutenant is introduced early on and is given one chapter, and it's a fairly short chapter. He pops up again like two more times, and then he's present for the entirety of the climax, which is like 2.5 chapters. I guess it's 1.5 chapters, but chapter 4 is quite short. And meanwhile, the rest of this 230 page long book is just basically the reader stuck in this priest's head, and subjected to all of the memories the priest is going over, the being presented the priest's life in as the priest is remembering it, and being presented the priest's circumstances as they arise, such as meeting the half-caste mestizo Judas character. When you first meet him, and then you meet him again later on, or when he is imprisoned for being drunk and not because he's a priest. They don't figure that out. And when he meets we'll have to talk about this family later, but when he runs into the Fellows family, the banana plantation family, and then runs into their house again later after a raid, sometime later in the book, you're presented with this guy who is hyper aware of himself in his circumstances, to an extent where he's certainly biased, but he's hyper aware of all of the bad things that he's done. And towards the end, I don't want to do this now, but towards the end of our episode here, I would like to do what we have to do, which is compare this to Silence, because it's begging for the comparison. But I don't want to do that yet. So this guy, he's spends a lot of anytime he's left alone with his own thoughts. One, he does think of whiskey, but more often he's just stuck looking back on all the bad things that he did. And all of the sins that he had done, all the ways he had let down his parish, all the ways that he had gotten people from his parish into trouble, just by them covering for him or not covering for him sometimes, all the ways that he had wasted opportunities back before things had gotten really bad. Especially, there's one passage, I forget where, otherwise I would quote it here, but there's one passage somewhere in the second half where I think it's earlier in the second half, he's mentioning how, getting out of seminary, and he would go attend some of these feasts with these other priests in the capital, and then as things were getting bad and getting worse, one by one, all these priests, most of them just left town. They just left, and he just kind of waited and waited and waited, not really thinking it was going to get so bad. And then by the time it got really, really bad, he was trapped. He wasn't able to get out, and everybody else had left, and then priests were getting shot. And it's just sort of like this guy who just isn't paying attention at all until it's too late for him not to pay attention. Which is kind of, I guess, like somewhat typical alcoholism to some extent. But still, it's described very well in this priest. So, getting back to the point here, he is definitely set up. The lieutenant is absolutely set up as a foil for him, but he's not. The lieutenant doesn't play as large of a role in the story in terms of how often you actually see him on the page as I would have expected, given the synopsis on the back. So there's that, and the core element of the book. Yeah, would you prefer a so-called a bad man with God, or a so-called good man without him? And for the religious, a good man without God is a contradiction in terms, but sort of there is this zeal for a certain kind of belief. And also the interesting thing with the lieutenant, like you said, he's not opportunistic at all. He's very thorough, and he actually is he's burning with some love for justice, at least as he understands it. The problem is that it's how he understands justice, right? How he makes sense to him for it to be dispensed, which, conscience is important, but he is blinding himself in that regard. But still, what was really cool about the lieutenant was at the very end, he actually does go out of his way to try to honor the father's last wish, which was he wanted to have his confession heard by the only priest left in the entire state, who had effectively apostatized, but was still nonetheless technically a priest and could hear his confession. And the lieutenant went out of his way to try to make that happen. And the priest that he was going to, this Father Jose, I think, is married to this absolute battle axe of a woman who says no. See, you can't go do that. And he just very disgustingly capitulates to his wife, and the lieutenant's like, all right, well, whatever. I actually tried pretty hard to make this happen. It's just not going to happen. So, good on him, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also true what you said that, in terms of percentages, most of the novel is spent in the priest's head as opposed to detailing whatever's going on with the lieutenant.
Yeah.
I guess what I had in mind when I claimed that it was at the heart of the book is just I was thinking of this. I honestly consider it a climactic exchange or ongoing interchange between the priest and the lieutenant as the lieutenant is bringing him back
absolutely
captive.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the most important part of the book for sure.
And perhaps it doesn't need to be said, but obviously a tremendous part of the priest's anguish in his situation is precisely that there isn't anybody around to absolve him.
Yeah.
Or virtually no one. And so he just feels like he's left to die in his state of mortal sin, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Yeah, that weighs on him very, very heavily, and especially in the last scene with him right before his execution. It's he's in his cell and he's basically giving a general confession as best he can to, in some sense directly to God, but it's to nobody, right? It's to the air.
Surprise, surprise! The sacramental system, as Roman Catholics understand it, is brought heavily to bear on the situation.
Well,
who would have thought?
Yeah, well, that's also kind of the thing too. The priest is well aware of how the lengths to which these dogmatic attributions, are not dogmatic. The sacramental, like how we understand the sacraments, if there is no other option, this is allowable basically, and you should be trusting in God's mercy. When there truly is there is no other option. If there is exactly one priest left in this city that can hear your confession, and you've done everything you can to see him, and he denies you, well, it's no longer your fault. It's out of your hands at that point, and obviously God would be aware of this. And this is actually part of the narrative too. I had marked this segment probably for some other reason, but there is a sequence where he is able to get out of the state of Tabasco. Actually, the scene of him escaping with the woman and the dead child up the mountains. I want to ask you about that too. But before that, it's after that sequence. He gets to a small town where there isn't a priest, but there's a church, and the state there is quite a bit more lenient on the celebration of the faith. It is still technically illegal, but they're not, for the most part, putting priests up against walls and shooting them. And so he's there, and it's the first time they've been able to see a priest in a little while. So there's a big line for confession that he's hearing confessions, and he gets this woman in confession who is very she's going over all these different things, and he mentions he whispered warily, "A drink is only the beginning." He found he had no lesson he could draw against even that common vice, unless it was himself smelling of brandy in the stable. He gave out the penance quickly, harshly, mechanically. The man would go away saying, "A bad priest," feeling no encouragement, no interest. He said, "Those laws were made for man. The church doesn't expect. If you can't fast, you must eat, that's all." The old woman prattled on, while the penitent stirred restlessly in the next stall, and the horse whinnied, prattled of abstinence days broken, of evening prayers curtailed. Suddenly, without warning, with an odd sense of homesickness, he thought of the hostages in the prison yard waiting at the water tap, not looking at him, the suffering and the endurance which went on everywhere, the other side of the mountains. He interrupted the woman savagely. Why don't you confess properly to me? I'm not interested in your fish supply or in how sleepy you are at night. Remember your real sins. But I'm a good woman, Father, she squeaked at him with astonishment. Then what are you doing here, keeping away the bad people, he said. Have you any love for anyone but yourself? It's such a great passage. I mean, it's so good. Where this, because what Greene, I assume, is what he's doing here, what the priest is certainly aware of. He's hyper aware of what sin does to, not what sin does to the person, but what sin is before God. And maybe it's taken him, he took a bad road to get to that understanding, but he's still aware of it, and it's like hyper fixated in his mind. So when he sees people, treating this as not just the sacrament of confession itself, but also the more broadly speaking, the awareness of sin, where they're not really engaging with it. They refuse to engage with what sin actually is, and would rather hold tightly to this notion. Well, I'm just a good person who's done some bad things now and then, like not attended to certain things. And he's just like, no, it's not. You're wasting my time, and you're wasting God's time here, because you're not even being yourself. You're running from yourself by clinging to some other image you think you have of yourself. And that's the interesting thing about this book, is the priest is someone who doesn't have that. He's maybe he clearly did before the troubles happened to him. He mentions that earlier, but being so aware of his own sin and basically coming to an understanding of what it is, it gives him a very distinct way of looking at the world, which is really interesting. I thought that was really cool.
It was. He definitely doesn't have any patience for the smokescreen of piety that seems to be rather prevalent among those who still wish to retain their Christian practice in some form.
Yeah.
We see it not just in the woman you mentioned, but one of the women he ends up stuck in jail with.
Yes. Yeah.
That one evening.
Yeah, I don't think I marked that passage. That's another really good one. She's confessing to him, and then is scandalized that he's a drunk. And it's like, what kind of a priest are you, or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have it marked in front of me either, but I was just mentioning it because you are right to point out that it's another pervasive theme. Is he doesn't have any tolerance for these low and piddling ideas of what human sin amounts to.
Mm-hmm. Excellent stuff.
And as all of this relates to
I have it here. I did mark it.
Please share it.
Yeah, it's where are we here? I'm trying to find the exact passage, but I did actually mark this series. Let's see here. Somewhere against the far wall. Okay, skip that part. The pious woman said aloud with fury, "Why won't they stop? What's the good of your saying an act of contrition now in this state of mind? But the ugliness. Don't believe that. It's dangerous, because suddenly we discover that our sins have so much beauty. Beauty," she said with disgust. "Here in this cell, with strangers all around. Such a lot of beauty. Saints talk about the beauty of suffering. Well, we are not saints, you and I. Suffering to us is just ugly, stench and crowding and pain. That is beauty. That is beautiful in the corner to them. It needs a lot of learning to see things with a saint's eye. A saint gets a subtle taste for beauty and can look down on poor ignorant palates like theirs. But we can't afford to. It's mortal sin. We don't know, it may be. But I'm a bad priest, you see. I know from experience how much beauty Satan carried down with him when he fell. Nobody ever said the fallen angels were the ugly ones. Oh no, they were just as quick and light, and again the cry came, an expression of intolerable pleasure. The woman said, "Stop them, it's a scandal." He felt fingers on his knee, grasping, digging. He said, "We're all fellow prisoners. I want to drink at this moment more than anything, more even than God. That's a sin too." "Now," the woman said, "I can see you're a bad priest. I wouldn't believe it before, but I do now. You sympathize with these animals. If your bishop heard you..." "Ah, he's a very long way off. He thought of the old man now in Mexico City, living in one of those ugly, comfortable, pious houses, full of images and holy pictures, saying Mass on Sundays at one of the cathedral altars. When I get out of here, I shall write. He couldn't help laughing. She had no sense of how life had changed. He said, if he gets the letter, he'll be interested to hear I'm alive. But again he became serious. It was more difficult to feel pity for her than for the half-caste who a week ago had tagged him through the forest. But her case may be worse. The other had so much excuse, poverty and fever and innumerable humiliations. He said, try not to be angry. Pray for me instead. The sooner you are dead, the better. Yeah. Intense.
Yes. Well, I don't mean to railroad us, but there's one thing I wanted to make sure to say about the this question of whence goodness, or comparing the priest to the lieutenant, or perhaps anyone, but for that matter.
Go for it.
I'm thinking of the lieutenant in particular.
Yeah.
And this also ties back to the question of how the sacraments work and how the priesthood functions actually. So, as part of the extended interchange between the priest and the lieutenant in the closing portion of the novel, I think the priest actually makes a point of communicating this to the lieutenant, that a bad man with God, or at the very least a bad priest with God, can at least do this, if nothing else. He can still perform the sacraments and convey the goodness that is in them, assuming, of course, he performs the sacraments correctly.
Yes.
And that is, I believe that the priest says this, and I think the novel at large conveys this, that is incalculably more than a so-called good man without God can ever aspire to.
Attending to material needs as opposed to spiritual. Yeah.
Yes, and the priest also says as much. He says to the lieutenant, I'm afraid I might not have the passage in front of me, but he essentially says, you and people of your ilk, all you have is your own sense of righteousness, wherever that may get you, but as soon as that dies, you're right back to oppressing and inflicting suffering just as much as this ecclesiastical caste you so despise. And that's actually in evidence throughout the novel itself, because as we've talked about some, the lieutenant is nothing if not earnest.
Yes.
But in the course of pursuing what he thinks to be this noble goal, he thinks that it is justified to take hostages and kill them in order to flush the priest out.
Yeah.
These are innocent peasants that he is having shot.
The very people he's supposed to be protecting and championing.
Yes, and the idea is that, he may not want to do it, he may not take any pleasure in doing it, but he's decided this makes sense to do in order for the greater good. You can't ever get away from that phrase with these people. The greater good of exterminating the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always about the greater good without God.
Yeah, and it's like, if that's what exactly is goodness at that point, and it always comes back down to the, as you say, the material, just feeling good, basically, just feeling good.
Yes, and yes, the lieutenant.
I was gonna say one thing really quick too. It occurred to me about this, this contrast between the priest and the lieutenant. It isn't just, well, no, it is this, but it's also put in context. You have this priest who has had everything taken from him, and that's actually something that you can track through the novel in a pretty cool way. His cassock is taken from him, or he abandons it basically because ends up getting clothes, but even still, before he abandons it, the cassock is like rags at that point anyway. His portable altar stone is taken from him at some point, or lost it along the way. Like, all of his priestly accoutrements are lost. And these are the last things he even has by the time he's going on the run, because as obviously his church has been taken from him, his parish has been taken, his food, his drink, his house where he lives, his entire way of life is taken. So by the time you first meet this guy, all he has left are the clothes on his back, and I think at that point he may have still had his traveling altar set, but that, I might be wrong about that. He may have already lost that at that point too. Versus the lieutenant isn't exactly living a life of luxury himself, but he has all of the facets of his life still in order. Like, things have definitely changed in the past couple of years for him and for everybody because of the rebellion that took place, the sort of ongoing political unrest that's taking place. But, his uniform is still the uniform of a policeman. His gun still works. It's still his gun. He still has a gun. He still has a desk at an office where he goes to work and to clock in, and he still runs investigations through a command structure of people that still listen to him and obey what he tells them to do. So it's, I don't know, I find that contrast of this stark difference of, so-called bad man with God who has lost everything versus, if we're looking at how to say this in a more organized way here, because the way that the lieutenant understands the world is through material means, it's worth keeping the material involved here as part of the context. The material circumstances of the lieutenant versus the material circumstances of the priest, and how wildly they contrast, and how that can how that plays into their differing attitudes and how they approach life. But that's it. That's just something that occurred to me about 15 minutes ago.
It's a good point worth mentioning. And I wanted to add that since you say rightly that the lieutenant is taking in the entire world through this materialistic lens, he says flat out, I think this is during his extended interchange with the priest. He says flat out, suffering is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty on the nose. It's like, it's not just unfortunate, it's wrong. There can't be any suffering. There must not be any suffering.
Yeah.
How perfectly utopian. Anyhow, and this ties. There's even more on that. This question of material prosperity and just how worthwhile it really is. I don't have this passage marked either, but the priest essentially says to him, why do you want to lift up the poor materially anyhow if the rich are so bad? Why do you want to make them rich if you think the rich are bad? Turns the lieutenant's aspirations on their head.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't think if the lieutenant did have a reply, I don't remember it, but presumably, if it could be anything, it would have to be something like, well, the people who are currently rich are bad, but the poor people are good, and they would be good even if they became rich, and yeah, sure, okay.
I think it's this passage here, actually, but hang on, what's this page here? I was never any good at books, the priest said. I haven't any memory. But there is one thing always puzzled me about men like yourself. You hate the rich and love the poor, isn't that right? Yes. Well, if I hated you, I wouldn't want to bring up my child to be like you. It's not sense. That's just twisting. Perhaps it is. I've never got your ideas straight. We've always said the poor are blessed and the rich are going to find it hard to get into heaven. Why should we make it hard for the poor man, too? Oh, I know we are told to give to the poor to see that they are not hungry. Hunger can make a man do evil just as much as money can. But why should we give the poor power? It's better to let him die in dirt and wake in heaven, so long as we don't push his face in the dirt. I hate your reasons, the lieutenant said. I don't want reasons. If you see somebody in pain, people like you reason and reason. You say pain's a good thing. Perhaps he'll be better for it one day. I want to let my heart speak. At the end of a gun. Yes, at the end of a gun. So effectively, the lieutenant answers that question by basically saying that it's not about the one time it's not really about material ends. It's about feelings. I want to let my heart speak. Uh, I see somebody who's suffering, and I feel bad about that, and I have to, I have to fix not necessarily the suffering that the person is in, really, but I have to fix this bad feeling I have in my chest when I see somebody else suffering,
Yeah.
which is actually kind of interesting because that gets right into the priest goes right into understanding, mentioning about love and that God is love and all of that, which is another thing Greene does really well, I think, is capture the um, what's the word? Terrible is not the right word because that's a bit of a wrong connotation, but sort of the awful, full of awe notion of
Yes.
what that
Yeah.
really means. But it is also a sort of negative slant to it as well because, as the priest mentions, um, God is love. I don't say the heart doesn't feel a taste of it, but what a taste! The smallest glass of love mixed with a pint potch of ditch water. We wouldn't recognize that love. It might even look like hate, but it would be enough to scare us, God's love. It set fire to a bush in the desert, didn't it? It smashed open graves and set the dead walking in the dark. Oh, a man like me would run a mile to get away if he felt that love around. And when you read some of the writings from the saints, um, not even like some of the revealed stuff that's not it's just private revelation. It's just not on the book, so to speak. But even just some of the stuff from the saints about the immensity of God's love, what infinity means in this particular sense, and again, taking into consideration what the book is also about, which is what sin is. You start to kind of see inside the priest's mind at that point where he's aware of what this love really is and also aware of the sin that he's mired in and and there are moments, flipping the script a little bit, there are moments in this book where you do see the priest um, grow physically tired with the elements and with the people that he has to interact with. But it's very rare, I think, for him to really come back to like, it's funny. He's self-obsessed because he's constantly carrying around this guilt and this desire for absolution, which is totally sensible. But he's not self-obsessed in a way where he's putting himself in front of these things. Does that make any sense? Like he's not like it's not like he's pitying himself in the process,
No.
where he's like inserting himself into this narrative where he deserves to be pitied somehow. You never see that. The closest I think
No.
you ever see that come to possibly might start to bubble up is actually earlier on in the novel. He's traveling on his own and he gets into a town and he's being hidden, and one of the villagers who's hiding him, and he's like completely exhausted, like he's falling asleep on his feet, starving, and he just wants to sleep. And one of the villagers comes and is like, "Father, please, you must understand, we haven't had a priest here in like 2 months or something like that. Would you please hear our confession?" And he's just like, "I want to die. Just let me, just let me sleep." I forget what chapter it's in, but I remember that very vividly. And I think that's the closest you ever see him really start to be like trying to take himself before others, so to speak. Uh,
Yeah. That is one of the other uh, defining characteristics of the priest is that he has this overwhelming sense of duty
yeah,
to his vocation. The whole reason he is not he is not able to escape ultimately, even after he waits as long as he did, as you described earlier, is because he feels a sense of obligation to those who are left. Uh, from the very beginning of the book all the way to the end, uh, we see just in the span of time that the novel encompasses multiple occasions where, based on what we are told, he could have gotten away. And then, of course, closer to the middle or the last third of the book, he really was about to get away. But somebody came along and started talking about how somebody
Needed.
wanted confession or was about to die. And you
Yeah.
could see him rolling his eyes to heaven, just like, oh my, I have to go back. I cannot leave,
Yeah.
or I will feel even more guilty than I already do about everything else.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that's how he's caught in the end.
Yep.
So
And he knows it too. He walks right into it. And he knows what's going to
yeah,
happen.
it's great. He's like, this is 100% a trap, but on the 1% chance that, sorry, I should have said 99% chance this is a trap, but on the 1% that it isn't,
Yeah.
I am going to come back with you. And what's really great about the way it plays out is it is a trap, but the guy that they were claiming was about to die was in fact there, and he was dying.
Yeah. Yeah. And he apparently did actually, perhaps in delirium, did ask for a priest. And when the priest came, he was like, "You shouldn't have come. Like, I regret asking you to come here." These people, man. Yeah.
But all of which is to say, you are correct in your assessment that his self occupation should not be understood in a way that suggests that he is uh, unmindful of other people's
Right.
needs. Quite the opposite.
Yeah. So there's one thing before I forget. Actually, we could talk about that real quick. If there is, this is, I've got a couple of very generic guided reading questions that I thought up in the last hour or so. Well, actually, before we
We can
started.
go as you like because I did a very poor job of preparing structured discussion points.
The It's fine. That's just how it goes. The uh, one question I've got a couple for you, and it's regarding the importance and relevance of specific characters. I think we've covered the lieutenant pretty well. And the lieutenant, I think, is also the most important one to cover, other than the priest, of course. So after him, the the guy that we just talked about, the outlaw, the American outlaw. I found this very interesting in the book. We only meet him at the very end when he dies, but he's the reader is made aware of him in pretty much the same breath we're made aware of the priest at the very beginning. And there's like this completely unseen subplot that the reader never gets a glimpse of that happens in the background regarding this American outlaw that showed up in Mexico, robbed a couple of banks, got into a gunfight, and then has been on the run. And then there's like another scuffle we don't see. We just see the aftermath of it from both the priest side and the lieutenant side. Actually, you hear him talk about this aftermath where they corner him, but then he takes a hostage, and then there's the soldiers basically shoot through the hostage, which is the kid, just some unnamed kid, and he seems to have been wounded, and he flees, and then that ends up setting him up to be finally got in the mountains which is where he is when the priest comes to him. But I was just wondering if you think there's any, I don't know, just what's your opinion on the American? Because I don't know what to think about him other than it was a really cool literary device that Greene pulled off with this whole thing.
Well, I would say for most of the novel, he functions as another foil or character contrast to the priest. Let me, in a limited sense,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to
Okay.
clarify, the way that the outlaw is described by the lieutenant or whoever else in the Mexican, the Tabasco state government.
Right.
They're basically treating the American outlaw as an afterthought almost.
Compared to
And
the priest, yeah.
yes, they must have said it at least 2 or 3 times. They're like the outlaw and whatever, but we really got to get that priest.
Yeah.
He's the real target here,
And meanwhile, the
not the
outlaw's
guy,
a
not the guy
violent
who,
criminal.
yeah, not the guy who robbed and killed and or did whatever else. I lost track. So that just serves all the more to show what kind of framework they're functioning in here, and uh, readers can judge for themselves how well that stacks up in their eyes.
Yeah. The next one. Um, Actually, we'll go by order of proximity here. There's that sequence where the priest comes. Um, yeah, this is going backwards a little bit. That's okay. There's that sequence where the priest comes to the empty banana plantation, which we'd seen earlier in the book, where the Fellows' residence was, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But he gets there, and then he's tailed by a native woman that barely speaks any of his language. And it turns out that she's got a child, and the child is very close to death, and then he does die. And then he's like, "Oh, I mean, I can't do anything about it, and I'm trying to get out of here." So he starts walking, and she takes the child and walks with him and just tails him until they're basically just walking with each other up the mountains to get out of Tabasco into the neighboring state. And it's a it's not actually a particularly long sequence, but it feels very long when you read it. Just this woman carrying her dead kid with her up these steep mountains, these switchbacks, these long switchbacks, until they get to the small like plateau up at the top of the mountain where a small shrine has been erected, presumably at the border of the state. And she leaves the child there and just stays there, and he goes off. He just continues on. I think he mentions that he gives a blessing and then continues on, and then kind of second guesses himself and feels kind of bad for leaving a woman in the middle of nowhere all by herself, especially with the American outlaw on the loose, who was clearly involved in this. So he doubles back and goes back to her, and she's gone. And so he's like, okay, we never see her again. But one thing that struck me while I was reading that passage was, I'm probably just reading too much into it, but it reminded me of Inferno, actually, or the Divine Comedy for some reason. Nothing specifically about it, but just, Purgatory is considered as a mountain in Purgatorio, so it's not Inferno, but and you have these two people who are basically trying to come out of hell and towards something better. And at that point in the book, he's leaving the state in order to get someplace that really does look like paradise by comparison. And I'm just wondering if I was reading too much into that, and maybe you had some thoughts on that whole sequence, particularly with the woman carrying this kid up with her. It's very macabre imagery there.
That seems like a fair comparison to make. I must confess, I don't really have anything profound to add about it on my end. It was an overwhelming moment among many.
Yeah.
I don't have special insight on it, I'm afraid to say. But I do. It was definitely a striking sequence. Yes.
All right, one last thing here on my list of things to talk about is choral fellows. So we've talked all this time, and we didn't get to one of the other set of minor characters, the fellows. I forget the father's name. Actually, it should be right here at the end of the book. Mr. Tench was the dentist. Before that, we have Fellows. It's just Mr. and Mrs. Fellows, I think. Yeah, Captain Fellows and Mrs. Fellows. Well, they had
That is a strange setup right there. Please go ahead.
they ran this banana plantation, and the priest comes to them early on in the book for shelter, and the captain doesn't really want to get too involved. He's not Mexican, he's an American. He's down there basically just because it's a place he can make money, and he's got a knack for the adventure. And they have a daughter who's like 10, I think, who considered herself to be an atheist when the priest meets her, but he makes a very strong impression on her. And then after he tries to go to the capital and of the state and get some help and is turned away and then is arrested for being drunk and spends some time in jail and then gets out of jail and then resumes his trip to get out of the state, he comes across the plantation again, and it's been trashed. Like it's abandoned. Nobody's living there. It's been trashed, and clearly people left in a hurry. And then you get to the end of the book, and it's never directly mentioned, but it's pretty obviously implied that Coral, the daughter, is dead, and I just wonder, what did he mean by this? Like, to introduce this character so early, and then it's like, well, that's that. It just feels, it doesn't feel bad. It feels fitting somehow, I have to admit. And also the fellows themselves are just a dreadfully depressing pair of characters.
Yeah, the whole situation with that family is incredibly bizarre.
Yeah.
The daughter is essentially presented as like the person who's actually like keeping things running.
Yeah.
With that business venture they were doing. Her parents just seem kind of out to lunch in various ways.
That might be what the point of the characters are, because these are these are different. Oh, that's right. He also, in this neighboring state, he runs into a pair of are they Episcopalians? They're Lutherans, right?
Lutherans.
Yeah, they're Lutherans. He runs into a pair of Lutherans that are also kind of out to lunch a little bit, but they have a bit more respect. They're a bit more engaged with their faith, as funny as it is, than the fellows who have no sense of faith whatsoever. They're just sort of, I think, what the purpose of that entire family is, in this, speaking from a macro point of view here, is just complete disinterested bourgeois, upper middle class. Like, we want to be adventurous, we want to have adventures, but we're also sort of tied down by the unbearably domestic nature of our sufferings. And they don't have a second thought to anything past that.
Yeah, that seems to be a fair read on them, I think. I have to be honest. When it comes to them and lots of other particular details and minutiae of the novel, it probably went over my head in a lot of ways. But
it's a lot to take in, I have to admit.
Yeah. If you're asking me what in the heck is the deal with this young girl having this, she has some crazy exchange with the priest, and it's just like, okay, what do you want me to make of that?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a pretty crazy. I unfortunately didn't mark any of that. I really feel like I should have, just to get it. Oh no, I just turned to it by random because she talks about Morse code. I think the thing about that exchange was really, like, it felt very sincere and very realistic, especially for a young girl who's engaged and pretty intelligent, and is old enough to have some opinions of her own. But then, here's this guy who's made a very vivid impression on her. Suddenly she's now at an age where she's able to become aware of, like, elements of reality that her parents are just too old to be able to become aware of, so to speak. It's like they're not going to be, they're too hardened in their ways for them for their vision to see past the limits of the sort of reality they've constructed for themselves, versus she's not quite at that age yet. And so suddenly she's introduced to this world of the priest, even though it's not necessarily in a religious dimension. She's still introduced to this world of the priest, of the fact that here's this guy who doesn't hurt anybody and is being hunted to death by the state. I think that really changed how she thought of things, and she recognized that this is someone who should be helped. Actually, that's going kind of back to the stuff that you were mentioning with the lieutenant, what we were both talking about with the lieutenant. When you see somebody who's clearly in pain, you should want to help them, and here she does exactly that, and gets killed for it, effectively.
Yeah,
Full
that's
circle.
probably the best read of the girl in particular. It really is striking. The priest is all the things we've said already about uh, how he's pretty low in the dirt, as it were. But even in his position, one might hope that he was still able to do a little good in that brief encounter.
Yeah.
And uh, I think that returns to a theme that we have seen more than once in some of these novels we have discussed, where uh, you can't ever you can't ever underestimate the power of God to do what He will with um, there are a lot of ways to put it, but
Yeah.
what I want to say here is bruised wicks, unless I mixed the metaphor.
Bruised wicks. I might not
Yeah,
be familiar with this.
I probably meant to say smoldering wick, or I mixed up bruised reed and smoldering wick probably, but that verse.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
A
Yep.
bruised reed he will not break.
Yes.
If I misapplied that scripture passage, please forgive me. I
No.
just mean to say broken tools,
Yeah, yeah,
essentially.
yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I don't have anything else to really talk about the book. I mean, there's always certain passages we could go into and stuff like that, but I think this is a good place. Especially, I have to admit, so far we're doing pretty well. I mean, I guess Silence didn't count because we both read it before, but we're doing pretty well picking good books. I don't think we've had a bad book so far that we've picked.
No, it's this we're
Oh,
it's hard to go wrong when you have when the deposit of history has settled enough.
for sure. So I guess to end on this whole thing, unless you had something else you wanted to bring up, I wanted to end on something specific here.
Well, I do want to ask you, since you mentioned it before,
Yeah,
uh, if you have any particular thoughts about how you would compare this novel to Silence, or what particular comparisons you wanted to make.
that's actually what I wanted to end on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear them because I wasn't really thinking about it myself when I was thinking about what we might talk about today.
Well, it so Endo has been called, or had been called, the Japanese answer to Graham Greene, or the Japanese Graham Greene. And when I read Silence, I didn't really get it because I hadn't read any Graham Greene. And then when I looked into the synopses of Graham Greene's books, I still didn't really get it because the synopsis of this does not really read much like the synopsis of Silence. After reading it, I see where people say that, but because the structure of the novel, well, the structure is actually totally different, but sort of the loose approximation of its content is very similar in the sense you have a priest who is wandering through a region that is where the state is actively killing priests and on the lookout for priests in order to do away with them. So at a very limited sort, they're kind of similar. Structurally, they're very different because this, like half of Silence is the interrogation, and different venues of interrogation, but full blown, like half of the book is just the interrogation of the priest. Versus this, there is no formal interrogation of the priest. The only time he's formally interrogated is when he's brought in because he was arrested for being drunk. But the sort of back and forth that the lieutenant and the priest have at the end is only about no, it's not even that long. It is from 191 to 203. Yeah, it's like 10 pages, 11 pages, which is a lot different from being half the book. So structurally, they're very different books. But the priests are so different, so radically different. We kind of really tore into Father Rodriguez last time, the protagonist of Silence, and I think rightfully so. I do like his character, but he really does apostatize at the end. I don't think there's any way to get around that.
And I'm cutting you off here.
No,
Please
go ahead.
forgive me,
No,
but
go ahead.
Whatever you have to say about the priest and the power and the glory, I don't think he was in that position at the end.
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. That's the thing too.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, in Silence, the core of Silence, the core story of it is basically a story of apostasy, of a priest who begins already with a slightly wrong understanding of not even understanding the faith, but how the faith interfaces with charity, so to speak. Like how do you maintain the dogmas and principles of the faith and also do so with nothing but love in your heart? And this priest in Silence, Father Rodriguez, he doesn't have that. Like he's got the dogma in his head, but he doesn't have the charity in his heart, and that ends up leading to a contortion of his expression of faith and his understanding of faith entirely, which ends up leading him into a place that is effectively apostasy. Even though I think he still tried to be sincere to himself, it still, I don't know how you can be. Anyway, we talked about that already in Silence. But for this book, the core story of the book with regards to the priest specifically is that basically everything he is doing and everything that comes to him is some validation of the faith, even as he understands it. And, so in this case, it's not so much about charity, so much as humility. This is much more a story directly about humility in that sense. Because he knows the truths of the faith, but so did Father Rodriguez in Silence. The only problem is that in this case, Rodriguez was still ultimately baffled by the problem of evil. And the problem of evil is something this book laughs at, something that the priest in this book laughs at. Not that he actually laughs at it, he takes it very gravely seriously, but the problem itself, he doesn't see it as a problem. It's just the evil that he sees. And it's so yeah, that's really all I had to say about it. I didn't have anything pre-prepared about that. But when I was reading it and when I was finishing the book, I was like, now I see why they were calling Endo the Japanese Graham Greene, because of this book. I disagree. I think they're very, very different, but they're both similar in the sense that they did not treat these topics with any frivolity. They were very well engaged and very serious about the stuff that they were talking about.
I think that's a good analysis. There's no question that the priest, Graham Greene's priest, he certainly is in despair, for pretty much the entire novel, but I don't believe terminally so.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important.
Yeah.
And as long as we're talking about this relationship between the two books, so Silence was published some decades after The Power and the Glory.
Yep.
And if people at the time were drawing comparisons between Greene's work and Endo's, I have an idea or two of my own of why that might be, because I would like to point out, since we're on the subject,
Sure.
that um, in the power and the glory, uh, the uh, the looming threat all along really is just straightforwardly, if we catch you, we're going to kill you, and
Yes.
that's how it goes, which is
Exactly what happens,
which
by the
is
way.
yeah, right, but um, in silence, of course, Father Rodriguez is fully expecting this outcome, and sort of
Looking forward to it in the wrong way, almost.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, until it gets spoken to him. No, actually, we're going to break you mentally,
Yeah.
so that you wish you were dead.
Yeah.
So, if you want to say something, if you want to say that Endo feels like an answer to Graham Greene, which I think is what you said earlier
I'd
at some point.
it wasn't me saying that. I think I read that in some critic talking about Endo. I don't remember if they said
Well,
the answer, the Japanese answer, or the Japanese version of.
well, at any rate, there is a reason why someone might think to say that Endo is giving an answer.
Yeah, yeah, it could be the. But it was also Silence was Endo's first novel, I believe. Is that right? Maybe he had one
Oh,
more
was
before
it?
that. I feel like I said that before and was wrong. So let me look that up again. Um, Endo Silence. Yes, there we go. 1966 novel. He is internationally he's known. I don't think it was his first. Never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just make stuff up, man. Make it up and source it later. 23. Really quick
My
here.
source is I made it the frig up.
I made it up. Yep. Okay, no, it's not even close to his first. He won the Akutagawa Prize for Shiroi Hito, White Men, in 1954, and the Akutagawa Prize is usually given to the debut album or albums, debut novels of up and coming writers, or one of their early works at least. It's a prize given to the youngish, 20s. If you're 30 and you're trying to make it as a serious writer in Japan and you don't win the Akutagawa Prize by then I'd say you'd probably neck yourself, but that happens to the ones who win it anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Oh my word! Are you telling me that the uh, the extreme prejudice against anyone over their 20s even extends to serious authors in Japan?
Just in terms of like hitting the ground running, but I don't know how true it is anymore. So, and
Because I know. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, it just I'm trying to think of one. I don't read Japanese natively. I don't even read Japanese in a foreign sense. I can read Romanji a little bit, but that like actually Japanese, no way, I can't do that. So my understanding of Japanese literature is all purely through stuff that's been that one attracted the West's attention enough to get it translated, and two was then translated that I then found and read. So, but the ones that reach international acclaim, yeah, pretty much all of them for serious literature, so called, they all of those guys won that prize. Pretty much all of them won that prize when they were younger.
All right. Well, I only made a point out of it because, as seriously as I can talk about this, I was always told in the anime I've seen that if you're like above your 20s, you might as well basically be dead. So, um, and not to go on a tangent, but I've often wondered in my time watching anime. I think, how much is this exaggerated for effect, and how much of this is actually commenting on a real uh, social cultural phenomenon in Japan? And this is just one of those. This is just a concrete example.
Just another example of it popping up. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert in Japanese culture at all. And anything like that. I'm not Japanese. I'm barely able to understand the language when I'm paying attention to it, and even then, not. And even then, it's really just by osmosis because I haven't studied it nearly enough to actually gain any sense of fluency. I probably should, but not going to happen in the immediate future, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know. The wouldn't take it too seriously. The anyway, that's I don't really have anything else to compare this book against Silence with. They're two very, very different books. I will say I think this book is better. I think Silence is very good. I like Silence a lot. It's a masterpiece. It's really, really good. It's not just very good. It's quite good. This book is the kind of book that, I'll be honest, it kind of changes you by the time you finish it. There aren't. It affected me pretty deeply, actually. If I was going to hold up like my favorite books, this might actually be up there, just on the first read. The only problem is it's so oppressive that I really
Yes, I was
don't.
about to use.
I
Yes.
don't want to read it again for like another 5 or 10 years. It's just, it's so oppressive. Brilliant, but so, like I said, the style that he's writing it with, the way he's able to interweave action and memory and sensation all at once. You just it's you feel the mosquitoes buzzing around your ears when you're reading it. You can feel the humidity compressing your skin, and the fact that like you just feel dirty and sweaty the entire time whenever you're reading it. It's is not exactly going to make somebody want to read the book, which so I should be saying the opposite, because I think I do want people to read this book. Not that they need me to say so, but it's just it it's so well done and it's so ugly,
Yeah.
but good, but really good. And it has a good ending. I mean, we talked about how the guy gets martyred at the end, but I mean, martyrdom's a good ending from a certain point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I'm not going to pretend to be highbrow. I do. I appreciate its. I want to say more uplifting presentation of the ideas that are going on here.
yeah,
Can I say that?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But anyway, that's all I've got for this. That's all I've got for this. You have any? I did some opening remarks. You want to do some closing remarks?
I appreciate the offer. I I've pretty much I've spent myself, so I'm afraid it would be wasted time. But I thank you.
No, no problem. That's what we got, folks. That's it. My closing remarks are um, uh, get yourself a copy, read it, and then go to confession afterwards. Not because you read it, but because after you read it, you're going to think, wow, wow.
Yes, appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. The And then one last thing I have to say is I think I posted this on Twitter at some point, but I really like the photograph that Penguin Classics, which I don't usually like Penguin Classics releases, but I really like the photograph they used for the front cover of this. And I couldn't find the photograph easily online, but it's a photograph by Augustin Victor Casasola, and it's a picture of what I assume is a policeman holding what looks to be a 1911, but it's out of focus. And the funny thing is that in this book, the policeman, the lieutenant, carries a revolver, and this isn't just like something that's mentioned once. It's like every time he talks about his gun, every time his gun comes out, it's a revolver every single time, and it's like, Penguin, you had one job. You
Ah,
had
yes, I remember thinking when I saw that post of yours, I thought, ah, now this could only have been written by someone who actually knows anything about guns,
yeah.
unlike myself.
Well, it's just like, I mean, a 1911 and a revolver look so different, and it's like when it's kind of like if somebody is into cars or just has a passing familiarity with certain kinds of cars, you'll be like, well, you'd use a truck for one thing and you'd use a car, like a race car, for something else. It's not quite that drastic of a difference between the two, but it is, there's going to be reasons why he's carrying a revolver. In At that point in Mexico's time, even like 19 what 30, it was 1930s, 1932, 33, this takes place. He's going to be it's going to be a choice for him to have a revolver. So it's sort of another like aspect of his character being more clearly defined. And I know it's just a book cover. You shouldn't judge books by their covers, except it is a really cool image on the front cover. It's just clearly, who is this guy? It's not the lieutenant. Maybe it's supposed to be, but anyway, yeah. It's just to set a tone.
They know who their audience is, and in their minds, the people who want to read this book and the people who are really into guns are generally not the same people.
True enough. But yeah, anyway, that's
they put me in their basket, but they couldn't account for you.
I just think guns are cool. That's all. But that's it. We're calling an ending it here. So we will have another one of these at some point when we are able to, and things are looking good. And hopefully, whatever book we choose next, which we'll decide after I stop the recording, will also be good. Hopefully, we don't choose any bad books. I don't think we will. That's jury is pretty well decided on these things. But that's it for me. Everybody, have a good night.
Thanks for listening.